understanding of really where I'm coming from. I got my degree in biology at Westmoreland University, took several years off to work as a field biologist to really figure out what I wanted to do. And then went back to graduate school to do that. And my specialty is working with bird populations, especially species that are experiencing population declines. They're either endangered or we have concern that they might be listed as endangered in the near future. So that's sort of my specialty, looking at population ecology and then specifically working with habitat management. How can we manage habitat for these species, get more habitat on the ground to actually boost populations? And so I have science-based recommendations for land managers. That's really, where my interest is, where my specialty is. But I'm also, a teacher, right? And so what attracted me to WPI was the project-based work we do at WPI. And so I've been involved in a lot of different, starting my own research, which this is part of obviously today that I'm talking to you about, but promoting active learning strategies in project-based environments, looking at peer and self-evaluations and how that impacts women and underrepresented minorities, looking at improving information literacy for students. So the classes I teach at WPI, I teach some freshman-only classes that are a part of the Great Problem Seminar program we have at WPI. About a third of our freshmen take these classes. And we co-teach these with someone else. For some reason, which I'm thrilled about, I'm always paired with a philosopher. Two different philosophers, actually. My two classes that I've taught, one is called Biosphere, Atmosphere, and Human Spheres. And we look at, problems related, my perspective is problems related to changes in land use, climate change, loss of biodiversity, those kinds of things. I also teach a class in that program called Livable Cities. Again, I'm paired with a philosopher in that class as well, looking at the ecological impacts of cities and how we change the environment, how that impacts ecological services, those kinds of things. I also teach for the biology department though, and so I teach an introductory majors class called Biodiversity. It's essentially an introductory ecology class. Biology majors have to take 2 of the 3 1,000 level classes, so they could take mine to fulfill that requirement. They also have the options of Intro to Biotechnology and Human Biology. And then I also teach a 1,000 level non-majors biology class called Environmental Biology. So that's my background at WPI, but like I mentioned, WPI, which I'm sure you all know a lot about WPI already, but it's a largely undergraduate institution, only about 4,000 undergraduate students with a heavy emphasis of majors in science and engineering. We have this extensive project-based curriculum that students really should know before they get there. And many of these sort of larger projects are actually built into their degree requirements. So as a sophomore, we suggest they complete the sophomore year, their humanities capstone. In their junior year, they're working on an interactive project where this is looking at some technology or some science and how that is impacting or influencing society, the societal impacts of science and technology. And then their senior year, they have to complete what we call the MQP, a major qualifying project. Every senior has to complete a project in their major field of study. And it should be something, some project that they could actually experience in their career as a biologist or as a civil engineer, etc. We encourage that these are actually team projects, so I'd say the majority of them are not individuals, they're team-based projects. And then, like I mentioned, a third of the incoming class each year now takes a freshman project as well. But there are some kind of odd things about WPI that I felt I need to share with you so you can understand the context that I'm working in. We have no prerequisites we cannot require any prerequisites for our classes. So an incoming freshman, our classes are, 1,000 is a freshman introductory level, 2,000 sophomore, so on. But we can have freshmen coming in taking a 4,000 level class. They're allowed to do that. We can't stop them. And then we have a lot of the opposite. Seniors taking 1,000 level classes, right? Because it didn't interest them, they wanted to be challenged right away. And WPI has some other structures in place that kind of reinforce this. We don't have failing grades. Okay, so they can receive an A, a B, and a C, and if they get below that, we call it an NR, a no record. It literally gets wiped off their transcript that they even attempted to take our class. And that was instituted to really give students the freedom to challenge themselves and explore, and not, be worried about the consequences of failing something. So there are, great reasons for it, and then there are also a lot of challenges associated with it, especially as instructors. So the class, this 1,000 level class that I implemented these modules is actually has more seniors than freshmen in it. So that is very challenging for me at some part. And then the 4,000 level classes in the biology department, so BBT stands for Biology and Biotechnology, that's just the name of our department, are literature based. So they don't use textbooks, they have to use only primary literature, those kinds of sources for students. Okay, any questions so far? Rebecca, if you know something that's important that I forget.
We're also on a 7-week term.
Oh yeah.
So we are not on a 15-week semester, and content is not cut in half, it's just simply doubled. So your classes meet.
This class that I ran these modules actually meets 5 days a week.
Wow.
For 50 minutes. And so that obviously dictates the structure of what I put together. Yeah, thank you. So
And how many terms are there a year?
4 terms. So it's essentially, half a semester, and then.
Oh, okay, so it's not quarters, it's really something
It's
like
not
condensed
quite
semester.
quarters. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
How many classes do they typically
So they
take?
typically take 3 classes because we're expecting a lot more of the individual classes they take. Yeah, so they only take 3 classes. Those classes are supposed to meet between 3 to 5 hours a week. So most of them 4 to 5 hours a week, really. Yeah. So they take fewer classes. We also expect a lot more work outside of class because they are essentially getting the same amount of credit as a semester-long class at other universities. So for accreditation, there is, and it's in everyone's syllabus, right? That they're talked to about this as soon as they come in with new student orientation. There is this expectation that you are working, more hours out of class than you typically would at another university to make up for that time. Okay, so there was a retreat last January 2015 for the biology department. We have an undergraduate curriculum committee that wanted to hold a retreat and sort of talk about where are we moving, what does our current undergraduate curriculum look like, where do we need to make improvements. And to me, a couple of things really jumped out around this need for science literacy. So the people who are teaching those upper level courses were saying that, these 4,000 level classes, even seniors that are in them are not prepared. They claim they know how to read the primary literature, but they don't have the skills, right? They also were saying that this is the same for when they're going through their major qualifying project, their MQP, that they don't have the skills to really dig into the relevant literature, even still finding the relevant literature, right, to their project, and then analyzing, integrating it, etc. So they were really stressing, they broke us up into like introductory classes, 2,000, 3,000 level classes, and 4,000 level classes. And so they were saying we really need to have this broader discussion where we are working on these competencies of science literacy throughout the entire curriculum. Okay, so we need to focus on this throughout. And I thought sitting there, what do I do? Oh, I don't do anything. I don't do any instruction, I should say, right? I expect them to start reading primary literature, but I really didn't have, we do in the Great Problem Seminar classes, and Rebecca is one of the librarians that's actually embedded with the Great Problems Seminar program. But in our biology 1000 level classes, we really weren't providing any instruction. And so I thought I would, define what I mean by science literacy, because of course, I hope you're like me, love Neil deGrasse Tyson. Of course, science literacy is used for, a general education strategy, having science awareness or science appreciation, understanding the process of science. But I'm really viewing science literacy as the case for science literacy for science experts. And this article that I have cited there, the 2013, is one that really was great for my development of these modules. She's got some amazing work that she's been publishing and putting together. But I don't need to tell you why science literacy is so critical, because you know this, but it's been shown to improve critical thinking, enhance quantitative literacy, and there's been a really big push lately as well. How do we increase or boost quantitative literacy in classes? I'd say at WPI the students are pretty well, they've got an edge maybe on quantitative literacy than some of the other student populations, but again, this will reinforce that, help them even more, build stronger civic engagement, and of course graduate educators, any graduate school, medical school, etc., is expecting that students as they arrive can comprehend, integrate, analyze the primary literature they're reading, and employers are looking for those skills as well when they're hiring. Okay. So, hearing in the retreat, this real need from the department, I saw that this was echoed throughout some of the papers I started reading. Students, their competency in reading, understanding, being efficient in the process of working through primary literature is really lacking, and they're not effective readers. Okay, so there's this echoing need to improve their science literacy skills, but very few programs actually take these steps, right, and formalize some kind of implementation into their curriculum. So getting together, with the whole department and talking about a strategy is tough, but it's really needed. So, and the undergraduate curriculum committee does expect me to present to them as well on this. So I told them, okay, now I've got some slides ready. I'll come talk now. And so, how did I go about doing this? So I want to talk about, how I came through this process, because it takes a lot of time. I was fortunate to get a faculty learning community grant through WPI's Center for Teaching and Learning. And they offer grants, and it was a one-year grant, so I started this in May 2015 and just kind of finished with the group in May 2016. So again, this is really new, really fresh. And the goal, the overall goal is to promote competency in reading peer-reviewed research articles at the introductory level. I'm specifically interested in the introductory level. So I've laid out the major steps I've taken. It's not necessarily a linear path, right? I have to keep looping back, but I wanted to let you know that this faculty learning community that I was a part of is a group of mentors of faculty and staff. We would meet once a month. Rebecca's part of it. We would meet once a month. We would give presentations. The people who were working through their initiative would give presentations and get feedback from everyone, and it was extremely helpful to me, to hold me accountable, to keep me moving forward, to get the feedback from everyone. Everyone has a different perspective. It was an interdisciplinary group, which was very helpful. So I think what I want to say is, if you can be a part of a learning community, if you haven't already, definitely try to do that, because I think it's a wonderful experience. I've done another one that's completely like folks all around the country that we use Google Hangout to meet, and that has been really helpful as well for a totally different topic. But yeah, learning communities I found was extremely helpful to me in this process. So I'm going to talk a little bit about talking to the other faculty in the biology department first. Any questions so far again?
Actually,
Yes.
Your learning communities, are they peer learning communities or are they also including students?
So they're peer. Yeah, we don't have students, but what they will do once you have, the expectation is you work on an initiative and implement it while you're still part of the learning community. And then your colleagues will bring in students as a focus group to get some student feedback on the implementation. So that's the way students are involved, but only at the end, really. Yeah. Yes?
Does WPI have any kind of a writing center or a reading and writing center?
We do, yes. And actually, one of the faculty was is he the director of it?
Yeah.
He just happened to be in the learning community this time. Yeah, but we do have that as well. Okay, so I spoke with a few faculty members first to lay out some potential learning objectives for my science literacy modules. And then I sent out a survey to the biology faculty asking them a range of questions. So first we can see that a large majority of the faculty expect students to read primary literature while they're taking that class. And I asked them, so how do you use primary literature? And you can see, often, these are most common, often it's supplemental information, so they may have a text, but here's, a current study that relates to the topic we're covering this week, so read that or talk about it in class. Many of our biology classes have projects within them, so they likely have to read primary literature to research their topic that they're working on. We may have specific assignments that primary literature is included, used to talk about the process of science or illustrate, what's happening right now in a particular field of biology. 57% say they offer some instruction. They use reading guiding materials. Some folks use in-class instruction, in-class time. Some brought a research librarian, which I guarantee was Rebecca, to the class. But the time was pretty limited. One person did say it varies by class, but most of the responses were 20 minutes or less, right? So there's very little time that they're actually dedicating in-class time to instruction in reading primary literature. Remember I said those 4,000 level classes expect students to read primary literature, and they will have discussions on the literature, but no instruction on how to go through it, how to read it, how to find, how to analyze, those kinds of things. They're just expecting it at that level. So I laid out, like I said, a couple of potential learning objectives, and I wanted to know at what level do you think each competency should be introduced in the curriculum? Okay, and so I've highlighted the ones where the majority of people thought it should be introduced at the 1,000 level. Okay? So it's most of them, right? Most of them they believe should be introduced. Some of these at the bottom here, like evaluate authors' inferences, not until into their sophomore year do they think students would really be ready to start even looking at it, okay? So, and this I wanted to really guide the emphasis of my modules. This is before I really started writing them, organizing the content that would be in the modules themselves. So I really wanted to get some feedback from faculty. What do you think is most important for us to cover that first year with students? I then also asked them when they think they should be mastered. Okay? You can see some of them are quite late. These ones on the bottom again, not until their fourth year. Between their junior and senior year, do they really think they can or should be able to master some of these skills? And then you can see very few are actually expected to be mastered in the first year. Okay, so this also gave me some ideas of, I'm thinking specifically like statistics and that kind of stuff. What what are the other faculty expecting from the students as well? When should they have these things mastered, or when do I introduce them? Those kinds of things. What strategies do we take that'll be most effective and efficient? Here are some challenges that the faculty perceive. This came up a lot, this lack of background knowledge, the language, the academic language, and the background information. Students don't understand that, like, we don't write half of what we're thinking in our articles because it's just known, right? Like, if you're an expert in the field, you know what I mean if I use one word, right? Which is why we can condense everything, why our method sections are so short. I also advise MQPs, and I have 2 students this summer doing research and writing with me, and I had to try and explain to the student again, I see your methods, but it really should look like this, because you just assume everybody knows, really. You add that citation, and everybody should know what you're talking about. It's crazy, but that's just how it works, right? And it's really hard for them to understand that. It's really hard for them to grasp that. But so having this background knowledge, whether it's reading the introduction or reading the methodology, is really just, we assume it as experts, we know that, we're so used to it. But the students don't have that, so it makes it even more challenging for them to read it. And the field of biology is so broad too, right? I mean, I just have my little expertise, but switching to a slightly different field, I'm completely lost as well. And then the time constraints. That was a huge concern for the faculty, that, again, they recognized how important this is and how challenging it is for the students, but they really feel like they don't have the time to dedicate to a lot of instruction. And people were definitely willing to use out-of-class material and the online material. Some people were not willing to add any in-class time to instruction. So that's definitely a challenge to work with, right? With any group. So I want to talk first about the conferences. So this is the discussions we had and the structure, how I had them set up. So as Rebecca mentioned, we are on 7 weeks, okay? So C stands for conference here. So the first week, so I said this class was 5 days a week. I dedicated 3 of those days to what I'll call lecture, and then 2 days to conference. And I split the class in half. So on Tuesday, I had half the class in conference, the other half, they also had a project running through the term, so technically they could work then. And then Thursday, I had the other half in conference. So the first conference, they had a pretest. They were not graded on this pretest. They did get participation points for completing the pretest, and I'll talk a little bit more about the pre and post test in a minute. And then you can see conferences 2 through 6. They had modules associated with those conferences. You can see the titles of the different modules. Again, then conference 7, the last week of classes, was their post-test related to the modules and what they had been covering.
And that they were graded.
And they were graded on the post-test. I scored them both, but they only, received their score towards their grade for the post-test.
Did you tell them what their pretest score was?
I didn't. I did not. Only one person actually asked to see the information, and it actually took quite a while to get through them. And I said, well, because I was a little concerned, I couldn't really share the answers because that was going to be the post-test, kind of swapped, which I'll explain the experimental design. But I said, well, we're going to be covering this through the term, so let me know, each week what your questions are around each module, and then at the end of the term, we can have a discussion before the post-test if you have any, but surprisingly, only one person actually asked for their pretest.
How many students are in a class typically?
So this class, the population is set at 75, but this year I was actually quite happy. There was a registration snafu, and I only ended up with 45 students, which I was really happy with the first year trying this, right?
It's still a lot.
It's still a lot, yeah. And I'll say too that most of the students actually aren't biology majors. So we get a lot of non-biology majors in these classes. The non-bio major, or the introductory biology classes for non-majors, their population is set at 150, and those are always full. And so students who can't get into those tend to spill into our majors classes. And we've been making changes in our curriculum to try and actually get, rather than 150 in like environmental bio, we do it now over 2 terms, so we can actually accommodate 200 to 300 people instead. So hopefully our populations won't be 80 anymore in our introductory majors classes. So we've been trying to make changes there because 80 is a lot, and I was thinking, wow, a conference still with 40 students is going to be a lot to handle. But like I said, I was kind of happy with the registrations now. They forgot to open my class. Registration occurred. And the key was it was especially to freshmen. So that might be why my first year student number is so low in this particular. We'll see how it is this next academic year if they don't forget to, hopefully they'll remember to open my class. Okay, so for the pre-test, at this point, I had the modules written, of course, and the last thing I really did before class started was put these pre and post tests together. And I was very deliberate in that I wanted 4 questions per module. So I have specific learning objectives with each module, and I wanted to make sure I had an even distribution of questions across the test so I could see if they struggle with concepts from one module or not, see how, in the pre-test and post-test. It was a mix of multiple choice and open response. I had some additional questions. I asked their confidence for each of those 20 questions. How confident were you in your response? And they had 5 options that range from not confident at all to very confident. I also asked them, after their 20 questions, some questions about effort. How many times did they read the journal article they were assigned? How many minutes, how long did it take them to read through it? What words did you look up as you were reading through the article? Here are the 2 articles I used. I actually used a randomized block design in my experimental design, where students were split up by block, so by their conference, Tuesday, Thursday, and then within their block, they were randomly given a treatment, either paper 1 or paper 2. Okay, and then they got the other paper and the other pre-test for the post-test. So these are the 2 articles I used from Northeastern Naturalist. I'm not sure yet what I'm going to do for next year, if I'm going to use these same articles or not. And I'll talk about this. This was probably one of the hardest things for me, was finding appropriate journal articles through the whole time. I thought these were relatively simple in a manner of, in the spectrum of reading primary literature in biology and ecology. Any questions on this? Oh, and they took this pretest in class. They received their journal article about 5 to 7 days before their conference. When they finished their pretest, I took all their materials. I took the written exam they wrote on, I took their journal article, I told them to bring it to class, I told them they had to read it beforehand, otherwise they wouldn't have time to complete all the questions. I told them, do whatever you want with your journal article, take notes, whatever. Oh, another effort, which I also quantified, sort of, was what steps they took while reading the article. Did they highlight? Did they make annotations? Did they use sticky notes? Some of these students really went all out in reading these articles. I mean, I'm not surprised it took them, 2.5 hours because of all their, what I call effort they put into reading this article. So that was also some information that we collected. I had a student help me grade and rank all these things. So she was a huge help in all of this, because this was a lot of and organize. Okay, so I thought I would talk about now the actual module associated with those 5 conferences. So there was a big online component. We used Blackboard, we're switching to Canvas, but this is all, they had 2 pages of information online in Blackboard. I show you 1 page here from Module 2. And I don't think we'll go to my WPI right now, but on your instructions, when we go through the workshop exercise, you can have access to this. Okay, so you can go through, see the actual modules, because I think it's actually better to understand them if you see them from a student perspective, right? So I didn't want to make them too long, so I decided to limit it to 2 pages of information. So it's pretty condensed, and I had to be very selective of the information I included. Once they got through 2 pages of information, they had a short quiz. This was really low stakes. It wasn't worth a lot of points, but they had to complete that. And then page 4 was a description of their homework assignment. Okay. In module 1, they had to go, their part of their homework assignment was actually doing a search through our library website and pulling journal articles and things like that. But in modules 2, 3, 4, and 5, they had a very specific journal article they had to read. They had to read the component that that module was covering that week, right? Like so, in this one, module 2, they had to read the introduction. They had to identify and explain the hypotheses. You know, the information that this module is talking about is reinforced in the homework assignment then. And all of that had to be completed and turned in before our conference. There is also, in addition to those 5 modules, there's also like a very short 1-page tips to reading primary literature that they could go to and reference. And for each homework assignment, it's usually like 5 or 6 questions, right, that I have them working through. One of them always related back to this tips for reading primary literature. Like one of the things is like build a concept map to read, you know, organize your information in a new way. So one of their homework assignments, they had to build a concept map for, you know, the discussion section or whatever, those kinds of things. So I tried to connect those. And I went through them in conference with students. And conferences, like I mentioned, it was half the class, but it was basically the same information we covered. What I would do is I would ask them, do you have any questions regarding the module material you read? I would go through I also had a TA helping with this class, and she would preview the homework assignments and say, okay, students really struggled with this concept. So then in conference, I would highlight and make sure I covered anything they struggled with. They had for example, I specifically remember, what is the difference between a descriptive study or causal or, you know, correlational? What are those, you know, differences? And so we'd have a discussion around that. So that was typically like the first half of conference. We had a lot of hands-on activities. I would bring journals with me a lot and make them look through them and, you know, pull out articles they thought were interesting. And then the second half would be, so if we're in conference 1, and I know for conference 2, actually that's a bad example. If we're in conference 2 and they just finished the structure of a scientific paper, we would pull up the journal article that would be due for module 3, okay? And the next one would be methods, right? So we would not go over the methods ahead of time, but we would read the introduction, anything that this module covered to reinforce it. So I knew they had a working understanding of the first part of the article they would have to read for homework. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. So I thought that what we really, like, I debated with the learning community, like, do I have, you know, one article that goes through the whole term that they touch on all their homeworks, or do I use different articles? And I ended up deciding using different articles, but covering material for that article in conference to make sure they understood, you know, the introduction we would do first, and the next time read the introduction and the methods to make sure, you know, they understood that. So, any questions regarding the setup or because I'm going to show you some results next.
Just
Yeah.
need to understand.
Yeah.
You said you meet every five days a week, did you say?
Yes,
And for how long each day?
50 minutes. So conference was 1 day a week, one of those days. Lecture was 3 days. And then conference I get kept on Tuesday and Thursday. I got half the group on Tuesday, half the group on Thursday. Yeah.
The students only 4 days a week?
So the students only had 4 days of class with me, and I told them their 5th day, they should meet with their group on the projects they were working on. Whether they did it or not, they did it over beers later, whatever, right? I mean, I did have mostly seniors, so. Yeah, so they were all signed up for 5 days, but they only physically came to class 4 of those days. Here's some information. I've just been going through this, pulling some results that you can see there was no difference. What's shown in the bar graphs is the mean each time and standard error of the bars. There was no difference in the time they spent reading and the number of times they read between the pre and the post test. Okay, there's no statistical difference between those. You can see they were reading articles, 1.8 times on average. They were spending a lot of time reading them, right? 85 to 90 minutes. Okay, so they spent a lot of time. They put in a lot of effort. WPI students definitely put in the time and effort for their assignments. And there wasn't a huge difference with the pretest, even though they didn't get a grade for it, right? They still wanted to, do their best, I think. There was an increase, there was a significant increase in confidence in their responses between the pre and the post test, and in the effort. Effort meaning like, did they highlight, underline, write notes? So effort increased, so hopefully I was showing them, through the term, how can you read through this effectively? And I show them, I model. I put on the document camera and I will show, look, I have this underlined. This is an independent variable, dependent and independent variable. They struggled with recognizing those in the text, so we would go through and I'd show them how I circle or underline concepts, things like that. When I'm reading, I try and model to them that it's challenging for me too, and the steps I take. And so, confidence for me is of interest because it's shown that if students have a higher confidence in their ability to complete a task, they are actually more successful in completing that task. So I've never collected that kind of data before, so I find it really interesting. And in fact, like I said, there was a significant difference. There was a difference in grades between the conferences and the pretest, so I was concerned about, do I have a certain subset of population conference Tuesday versus Thursday? So there was, you can see Thursday actually had a higher pretest score than Tuesday. Actually had more upperclassmen in the Thursday conference, and they scored higher in the pretest, but this difference washed out in the post-test. Okay, it didn't matter. Those younger students, the Thursday conference, that really washed out in the end. So that was good to see too.
Can I ask a question? Do you also model reading out of order, or is that something you don't find you do as much in your subfield?
So I talk about that. That's in Module 5.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Because we bring it up early because it was the biggest stumbling block for me when I was learning, because I skipped an intro class and went straight to some bio, never do that.
Right. So I was conflicted about that,
Yeah.
where to put that. And we actually did have a conversation in the learning community about that. And I said, but then do I structure my modules? Like intro, discussion in module 2?
Oh, right, yeah.
So I thought that would be really, if I told them in the beginning, jump around, then I felt like my modules should jump around. But then I didn't really think that made sense at an introductory level.
I mean, if you're breaking it down by parts of the
Yes.
paper, you're breaking down the work in another way.
Exactly. So I decided to keep the structure of sequentially moving through the paper in the modules, but then at the end in Module 5, I do have in there that we don't actually do this.
Right, well, you can read
And they're all like, oh my goodness.
Right, but you can read in different orders at different times.
Exactly.
And different subjects.
For different
Also tend
purposes.
to read in different
For
orders.
different
Yeah.
purposes. And so we do have a big discussion about that, yeah, at the end. And so that, yeah, that's definitely helpful. Let's see what else. I was also concerned about the journal articles I was using for the pre and post test. I specifically made sure they came from the same journal to try and provide some consistency in its difficulty to read. And there was no difference for the pre or the post test in the scores related to which journal article they received. So that was good. So I was worried about that. Because one article is a little bit longer than the other. You know, one article has a very large table, those kinds of things. So I was concerned about, again, the level of difficulty for those. And of course, this is what I was hoping, right? That there would be an increase in grades between the pre and post test. Now, you know, if I asked students the first day, they would say that would be their score at the pre-test, right? Oh, we're all, you know, we're really good at this. We're all going to get A's and B's on the pre-test, no big deal. But of course, they didn't. It's quite a low average. So it'll be interesting, you know, to talk to the students this year now that are coming into my class, saying it's okay that you don't do well on the pre-test. You are going to improve as long as you work through these modules, you know, etc. But don't expect to get a high score. And then I was interested in the modules themselves and what students struggle with. The y-axis here is actually the percent wrong. So you can see, like in Module 1 in the pretest, they got 30% of the questions related to Module 1 wrong. But you can see major improvements. Overall, like when I combine these modules, they improved, but you can see some of the modules, the content of some of the modules, they really struggled with, like Module 4, this is the results, specifically with statistics. If I just ask them to define a p-value, they can do that. When I ask them, you know, a specific sentence in their article to interpret that and justify it, I think like 95% got it wrong in the pre-test, and still like 50% or higher got it wrong in the post-test. So they really struggle with that. Again, that was something, you know, the faculty think they should master later, but they want these concepts being introduced. I didn't cover any particular type of statistic. We didn't talk about t-tests, we didn't talk about ANOVAs. We didn't do any of that. We just talked about p-values and what that means in general. So there wasn't, but still, yeah, the start of it, they're still struggling with. And so you can see that, you know, they got a large percent wrong in the pre-test. It went down a little bit, but I don't think that's significant, obviously, for the post-test. So then that provides information to me. Okay, they still struggle with this. This is something I need to work on more with the students. Or alert the folks teaching the 2000 level classes. You know, it looks like Module 1 content. They understand they've got it covered. They're doing well there. So have the 2000 level class really pick up on, you know, Module 3, 4, etc., that kind of material. Challenges for me working through, again, really a lot of it focused, once I decided, you know, my learning objectives for the modules and narrowing down the content that I use, I struggled with what are the appropriate journal articles to use for these modules. I was concerned about the length of the articles. I didn't want students to become overwhelmed, especially now that I see how much time they're spending reading them. Their lack of background knowledge. I was careful to try and select journal articles for a module that complemented lecture material for that week. So that they could have some background information, so they could start seeing connections between the research being done in that field. You know, it's easy to say, oh, there are latitudinal gradients in biodiversity. And they're like, yes, so, but then seeing like someone actually doing research in California trying to detect those gradients. So I thought the best I could. I can see now where I can maybe switch out a journal article or two for next year to try and match up content a little better. Because students are definitely looking for that match up and that connection. between them. Of course, I was concerned about the complexity of the language, the complexity of the analyses. Sometimes, again, I said, ignore that statistical test because we don't have time to talk about what a generalized linear mixed model is, right? Like, that's obviously beyond the scope right now of the class. But I did get some excellent questions from seniors in conferences about some of the sort of larger concepts behind some of the analyses, which I was surprised about, but really excited about. It got me excited, and I'm sure all the other kids were. And I was also really trying to find journal articles that had figures that I thought they could or should be able to interpret, tables that they should be able to understand. So I really ruled out a lot of papers because a lot of the tables were too complex or figures that they just wouldn't be able to interpret it at this stage. And I don't expect them to, right? I had a TA that led some of the instruction for conferences, and those would be Thursday conferences typically, and she would watch me on Tuesday and take notes, but there is a difference in instruction, obviously a difference in expertise, so I was worried / concerned, but I can't always do everything, right? I need to feel better about giving some of that up too. And then I told you about the challenge of the student population. I actually had a few freshmen in the class, a few first-year students, no prerequisites. Although for this class, there really is, because it's an introductory level, there are no prerequisites anyways. But that means I had a lot of seniors because they waited to take a 1,000 class. I don't know why. To me, it doesn't make logical sense, but again, a lot of students coming into WPI want to take those upper level classes because they see them as a challenge and want to tackle those right away. Even though we advise against it. So I just wanted to show some of the I showed the journal articles that I used for each module. This was the one with module 2. It had a very nice introduction talking about this latitudinal gradient of biodiversity, and I also tried to use, I'm an avian ecologist, so I could show them everything about birds, but I try and expand that, obviously, right? And pull up topics that I think they might really be interested in. So Lyme disease, anything like that, and it's related to biodiversity. The higher the biodiversity, the less the risk of having Lyme transmitted in a location. So that's a really important point I try to get across to students. So I thought I'd try and emphasize that by including a journal article related to one of their modules. Sometimes I pick things that I think they will find like, what? People do this? Yes, they collect roadkill, why not? And I think too, getting some journal articles outside of the US is important for students. We have a lot of international students, and they like to obviously see, the connection or how research is being done around the world. This is another one. This one's in the tropics, looking at, we were talking about trophic interactions and trophic cascades, trophic mismatches, and so this one tied in very nicely to, again, to the content we were covering in class. So those are the journal articles. You can see they come from a range of different journals now. That gave me the opportunity with the modules to give them a range. In the conference, before they had to read this, we did a nice jigsaw because now suddenly in conference we had to cover reading the introduction, we had to cover reading the methods, we had to cover reading the results, and that's a lot. We only have 50 minutes with them, right? So we actually broke it up as a jigsaw where one group looked for the hypotheses, and then they had to report back, and another group looked at the general methodology and the experimental design and reported back. So that was their introduction to this article before they then had to go read the discussion, which would be part of their homework assignment. Any questions? Yes?
So this may have been outside of scope, this exercise,
Yeah.
but did you at all cover any of the concepts like scholarly communications and open access journals? Did you, I noticed some of them were, did you favor those?
Yeah,
Did you talk about journal quality?
we did. So that was like module 1, was related to what is primary literature, what are the differences even within primary literature. We talked about citation, how do you reference them. We talked about open access. This is one of the conferences where I handed out lots of actual physical journals and we talked about it, but then we brought up an online journal as well. So we did have conversations about that. We talked about the peer review and the publication process. I know one of the comments from faculty was, even if they're not going to publish, it would be nice for them to be aware of the process and what does peer review mean? So how does that set, one source apart from another source? We talked about advantages and disadvantages of using primary versus secondary versus tertiary, because I said they're all important and for different purposes, and Rebecca comes in, she'll talk about that. But then for this particular, we were focusing on peer reviewed primary literature. Yeah, but we do have a large discussion about that, and some of the students were like, oh, they think they know it all, but they don't. My seniors anyways, my freshmen are not. Some feedback. I asked students for each of the learning objectives for the modules, I asked them to what extent did your experience with these primary literature modules help you, and then I'd be like, find, primary literature or whatever the learning objective was. And they had 5 responses to choose from, not at all to very much. I really decided I had to break this out between first year students and seniors because you can see seniors thought it didn't help them very much. But the first year students thought yes, the majority of them thought yes. For 58% of the time they said yes, this helped me very much. So that was, for me, rewarding to see. Because again, my target audience are the incoming first year students, not the seniors. And I know they don't like to hear that, but that's the truth. And I tell them the first day of class, 1, this is a class for biology majors. And you're going to have to, have a understanding of biology, and I focus it towards a biology major. I'm not going to water down anything, right? It's, and then 2, that it's a first year class. And so that's the level of the class. Here are some quotes that I took. I put the maybe not so positive first. Some didn't like the Blackboard quizzes. Some thought it was pointless if they already knew how to read. They thought it was a lot of work. They want it to relate more to biodiversity and less to reading primary literature. I actually had one student write, this is not an English class. Why are we doing that?
Expert pedagogy, are we? Yeah.
So those are some of the comments I got. And then I also broke out, these are the more positives for first year. They liked how specific and how much I got in 2 pages. They liked, there's a lot of graphics I put in there and tables with definitions. I tried to really break up the writing to make it as accessible to them as possible. So they like definitions. They like how we went through individual sections. I did require them to do a citation for every paper, and I did get one student drop out because she said, they said, well, all we're doing is learning how to write citations. Well, that's not everything we're doing, but it is important. And I'll say that. They thought they were easy to navigate. They liked, like I said, those graphics I included and concrete examples. Seniors, this was really I saw a lot of this. That they wish they took the class earlier. Some of them said, I taught myself already, but it was a good refresher kind of information. It would have been useful for anyone early on in the process. So I agree, they should have taken the class. So that's some of the feedback for that. Okay, so now Rebecca's going to. So,
I only have 2 slides. So for this class, I guess a little bit about me for those of you who don't know. My actual personal background is as a history major, cultural history, a little bit of archaeology, and then I became a science librarian. So I started at WPI. I was really integrated in the first year classes predominantly, which was really a helpful transition because they're really interdisciplinary. So I just sort of grew on general librarianship skills, and then I got partnered with Marja and started looking at what kind of challenges do we have with first year students sort of across the curriculum, and how can I learn to support in this more discipline specific way. So for this particular class, what we had done previously, or within these first year classes, what we'd done previously was a more standard one-shot discussion and discipline-specific discussion about information literacy, right? Come in, tailored to an assignment, which is fantastic. There was always something really practical for students to look at, got really specific, but it was a one sort of class, no not really any post follow-up individually with students, maybe in the learning, the Blackboard learning site, but not a lot of pre-work. And so what this allowed things to do was structure things differently. So students work through Module 1, and Module 1 we'll show you, give you access to, but one of the great things about Module 1 was that we actually built a step-by-step for students to go in and use library resources. So how to look at and navigate the WPI library site. So they go through this module and they actually have to find literature using our resources. So it guides them through that, very tailored to the library thing. And then I have a class plan. I did not print out, side note, did not have a chance to print out those, totally forgot. I will make them available online, and anyone that wants a copy of the class plan for this can get one. It's very detailed. And CPAC for class plan is not true. So then I visited the class, and this is where things got really fabulous for me. So I came to class and I said, does anybody have any questions on Module 1? And the level of feedback and questions that I got was at a whole new place. We had students asking about, they searched and they found this and they weren't sure how to get it. They were asking about quality and type of journals. Well, if I have a manuscript, how do I cite a manuscript, and what's the difference between a manuscript and a journal article? And if I have a journal in print and if I have a journal online, like how do I cite that differently? So the level of interaction and the types of sources that they were using to interact to ask these questions about really began to shape a whole different discussion. And so when I went to actually demonstrate some of the searching in class, as follow-up, we really got to be able to analyze the content of the article in a much stronger way. So instead of taking that time to model searching, which I still like to do, even though sort of that tension, right? But the modeling and searching has been important. So instead of taking the time to necessarily model searching, we have to take the time to model looking at a journal article and really discussing the components and the complexity of using those components for further research. So how does the title, and what's great about it is when I come in, I get to say, I learned a new term this time. This time I have to learn what trophic cascades were and how to pronounce it. So it was great, right? So I get to come in and say, I don't have this background, and I can learn how to research. I can learn how to research well and efficiently, right? Without knowing how to pull out the keywords, right? So for them, I would say you actually might be more skilled at knowing which keywords to use and helping me discover them, and I can show you how to really understand the components of searching for this. So we get to have this deeper discussion. So then we got to, the module quiz was sort of prior to the class, right? They take the quiz right at the end of the module. But the module quiz, I was able to help draft the language for the questions, or the answers to the questions. So if the questions were, define primary literature or define how you would find it, we got to scope that in what our expectations were for our information literacy. And so we got to have this feedback for free.
Oh, and the pretest post-test, you helped
Yes.
on the wording of the questions
Yes.
related to module 1.
So we got to have all of those answers there. Okay, so these were my teaching and learning outcomes. Went with some pulling sort of from the frameworks, but also pulling from the learning outcomes that were. So we got to have these really nicely tailored learning outcomes just for this class. Locate appropriate sources to design and write informational posters. So they had this way of connecting that this research wasn't just for their module, but also transferable to their final project. So we got to have 2 places where they had this actual tangible ability to take this work and do something with it immediately, which was really nice. The topic was these data components, and then demonstrate how to be an ethical user of information. So part of the citation questions, instead of just necessarily getting stuck in this, how do I cite the technical aspect of this one topic thing that I don't know how to define, was able to have the time to be able to incorporate, as they're going to be presenting, as they're going to be entering into this conversation, as they're going to be going through this level of primary literature and seeing all these scholars and experts write, why it becomes important, right? So they're looking at really deeply at these different components and seeing citations along the way from different experts. How do they become part of this conversation? So we got to do that as well. Right, so they referenced more varied and advanced sources, so that was fantastic. More advanced questions during in-classroom discussion. So for our component, for this sort of tying together with the information literacy outcomes, this scaffolded effect really increased in just a really short amount of time. So for me as a librarian talking to other faculty, right, I was able to say my in-class instruction was 20 minutes. My actual time in your class was 20 minutes. And so that was a huge bonus for me when talking to other faculty when it comes to getting in class and having that sort of advanced time. The other thing we were able to do was post follow-up questions, which was great because there were a lot of questions from the class right immediately in their Blackboard module, in the Blackboard site, so that they get an announcement on examples on things that they needed examples for. Any questions about sort of the flow of this? Or questions about this part of instruction? Yeah.
I just want to clarify that
Sure.
your 20 minutes time, was that per conference or was
No,
it
just
for the entire 7-week period?
Yep, for the entire 7-week period, and that was the and that was the level of questions that we got. And I had a lot of students coming back to my class. We had some great questions about students really trying to distinguish, is this secondary literature, is this tertiary literature, is this primary literature? So students were coming asking, is this tertiary literature? I'm totally confused. So I don't think I had gotten that question in my 4 years. So more than once, you know, and that was based off of the module plus the 20-minute in-class time. Yeah. Other questions?
Can I ask how you're defining primary, secondary, and tertiary? Because I'm in the habit of only teaching primary, secondary
Yes.
in a scientific sense.
Yes. So for this class, we had original research, review articles, and it's a little more elaborate, and then maybe like a trade journal
Or
on
a field guide,
a field guide.
something that compiled facts.
Oh, okay. Because I'm
Yeah.
kind of doing a grid model of primary versus secondary, scholarly versus popular.
Right.
So I'm doing a
Yeah.
slightly different slice, but okay, I'm not teaching
So
anything too different.
within all of those ranges, I'm sure that there are definitions of nuance there. For this broadly speaking, for this, that would be sort of the scholarly research, and then scholarly research that's commenting about original research, and then anything that's outside of that. That would count, especially in this type of work, where it is really important. Yeah.
Another question about
Sure.
your presence. So you were embedded in Blackboard,
Yes.
and so did you have your own dedicated space for the librarian, or were you were there weekly discussion posts that you chimed in on?
Not for this
or-
class, no. I would monitor any question, like anything that got sent out as an announcement. For this class, all I did was really just use the announcement features to sort of mass address things, put things up if necessary. If I, so that I was able to address the big questions around sort of formatting citations to everyone that came in. I posted probably, if I had this class, I don't think I posted a worksheet. I didn't do a worksheet for this class, but I could have if I needed to.
And like Rebecca said, she helps with the project too, so it's kind of like she was
Right.
included in this, but then also they came to her with the questions regarding the project
Right.
as well, and they're familiar with her, so they're comfortable with, seeking her out for more.
So we do get some follow-up on like individualized research consultations. So I can post a reminder that's like, you're working on this, feel free to ask research consultation questions.
Did you have access to the entire Blackboard site for that class?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you made use of it?
I mean, it was a class where I wasn't as embedded it didn't need to be, right? So the structure of this particular site, there wasn't need for me to do much more than I did.
I think for this class, well, I know you have for other classes
Yeah.
too, like their first project assignment, they need to do library research, and she'll, that's included with this and her class discussion, and you read through what they turn in.
Right. I go
access to all
right.
of,
I download assignments for my own personal look at things. If there are things that if I want to look at a group of assignments and say, okay, everybody, cited all government sources, we need to like push something, or examples of images or something of that nature. This particular structure wasn't really as necessary, but sure, if I would wanted to, yeah.
This is your only visit to this class.
Only visit to this.
Yeah, I hear there are more.
Have the
Visit of all the other classes, but yeah.
have the students that are whatever level, like the target is freshmen.
Yeah.
You got seniors doing it.
Mhm.
Is there another sort of time in the semester where they would see you or see another librarian in a class?
Yes and no, because of the prerequisite system, depending on, a lot of them have seen me. I'm also embedded in other biology classes, so there were some folks that saw me a lot and like one walked out. They were done with me. So by like the fourth class, they were like, yeah, I'm good, thanks on this one. So the curriculum's a little tricky like that. So what's really, I think what I want to focus back on is the schedule. Don't get hung up on me only going in for 20 minutes. It was great that I only had to go in for 20 minutes because the module worked so well. So the module that the students went through, and you saw that sort of in the data, right? Module 1, the numbers dropped, the wrong answers decreased quite a bit, right? The blue side was high, the brown side was low, and everybody was really happy about that, right? So they're not getting stuck on this finding literature and using the necessary databases. So going to Science Direct, going to Web of Science, Bio 1, Scopus, they're not getting stuck on how to really get at this primary literature after the module. So I'm actually really happy that in the 20 minutes that I went in, because they've now done whatever, an hour or whatever on this module, right? And you'll have a chance to look at some of this. So they've done an hour of that going through the searching. So what I'm doing is that follow-up, and in that 20 minutes, whatever it is, we really schedule it for 20, but I'm sure I talk way too long, right? So it's probably longer than that. But the questions, I didn't have to start talking, right? The questions were immediate follow-up, right? They were like, yeah, I got stuck on this, or I couldn't find full text here, or I don't know how to understand if this is a trade journal or peer review or a manuscript, and I can't interpret this stuff. So we got to start at this second level. So yeah, don't get hung up, I was only there once. Yeah.
Oh.
Okay.
As someone who's severely outnumbered by all the Asian bio students, I think it's great that you don't need to go there once. I'm like, that sounds awesome, because I've got 44 sections of intro bio, and I'm like, come to my section. I'm like,
oh yeah, and that's a lot of other sections of other things, so yeah.
I
Yeah.
The module that you're talking about, is that the one that you
there was some type of module that.
Oh, so that is what the research is based off of, yes.
That's
Okay.
a great.
Because that was cool.
Yes, so
You know, but the
the
nice thing was
access-
because it would give you a question and then you
Yep.
had to remember, you know, you selected an answer if you were correct, if it's like
Yes.
calculations, and if you were wrong, you sort of had to go back.
yes, so that is one of the pieces of research that this was based off of. And the access that you have to the Blackboard site will show you how that was all incorporated into this design. Yep, exactly. Yeah. Other.
I just have one last question. Maybe you're going to cover this later, but as you go through each of these modules, what ultimately are they working toward as far as their research project? Did you? I don't know if you already said that, but
No, I didn't. So the research project itself was based on another community that I was a part of. I had to implement a module that was pre-written for, I picked one on phenology and climate change. And so I broke that up into multiple assignments, and I added an assignment in the beginning where they had to go to the primary literature, pull out either trophic cascade or trophic mismatch, and explain it using, if they had 5 people in the group, they had to use 5 sources to explain it, provide examples, etc. That was assignment 1. Then they had to work through these assignments that were part of the module. One of the module assignments I added to because they reference a journal article, so I made them go read the journal article, and it was actually local, which was nice. It was a Massachusetts article looking at arrival time of birds and butterflies and how that's changing with changing climate. So I made them actually go read the journal article. And then their final project was putting together like an informational poster. If you need to go, they had to pick one species and do more research in the primary literature and explain how this is changing, how there are phenological changes occurring because of climate change and how that's impacting the rest of the ecosystem or community. So I was telling them you're learning these skills and these modules and kind of trying to make as many connections as I could with those. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
So this is the first time you've done this. Is there
Yes.
anything you'll change or do differently next time?
Yeah, so I'm wondering if I should change my journal articles so that there are fresh homework assignments, because I know how students like to hold on to those, right? And so I typically change things every year. So I'll probably go through and do that, but like I told you, that's a big stumbling block for me, or it takes a lot of time, but I think it'll be well worth it. And maybe I'll be able to find some articles that make tighter connections to the material we're covering in class as well. I liked sort of the structure, the pre-test, going through them, the post-test. I thought that was fine. I may see if I need to tweak some questions or not in there, but I think I'm gonna, I'm hoping I get the same TA. I already requested the same TA, because that's always a big, portion of getting someone else up to speed on everything. But it was a lot of work for the students. It was a lot of work for me and the TA, but I think it was worthwhile. I think it's the right step to get students, introduced to reading and understanding primary literature, so that when they finally do get to their 4,000 level classes, they can. I think after 2 years, I'll take a really big step back and think about what needs to change. I'm going to talk to the other faculty who teach 1,000 level classes for the majors and show them what I did and see how they can adapt it if they want to their class. One person's definitely like, yes, I am doing it. And somebody else might have to maybe pull their arm a little bit more, like, how about some of it, if not all, because they teach very different subjects too. So my examples aren't going to work for them. So there's still going to be some work involved if they're going to use something similar. Yes?
Can I ask a dumb question?
We're librarians, there's no dumb question.
This problem, it's not a problem. I look at it as a problem. It's not unique to your institution.
No.
Because I see it in high school, so that way when they come to college? Or is it, they're not teaching it at all? I mean, when I went to high school, I mean, we knew the inside and outside of the library. We didn't have computers when I was in high school. But I mean, we had to dissect articles, so by the time I got to college, you know, it was not foreign to me. But I mean, WPI is a grade school, UConn's a grade school.
Yeah, sure.
I'm working with undergrad and graduate students, even PhD students, working with master students that don't know how to find literature because they're given articles, and one was a psych major. I says, but your whole field is research. You have, I'm sort of upset because I feel like we're not solving the problem, and I don't know where that problem starts, and we're I don't know, it's just
Yeah, I mean, I think some students are exposed to reading some primary literature, but they're definitely handed it to, you know, it's handed to them. Very few. I think, I mean, this is a skill that I tell them I'm still working on, right? Like, this is something that we have to continually work on, just like my writing, right? Like, this is, and I want to let them know, like, you think you're good at it, but even I'm still working on this, right? And I have my search engines I love, but, or, you know, I think I can pull out something in a paper, but I still miss things. So I think college is the time for them to learn this. So I think, you know, this is the perfect opportunity. I'm not really expecting them to have the ability to read, or I shouldn't maybe have the ability to read. It's great if they can pull some things out, but it's that the journal articles are so specific to their, I don't know what you call it, sub discipline, right? Like, it's so specific that there's no way they could have that academic language and background to fully understand the components. And like I said, I can't cover a lot of the material yet because it's not something they can work through.
Just the questions about a scholar versus, you know.
I would love to have this part of the discussion all day, but I would also love to have more discussion at the end of this. So what we're going to do now is transition, and I'm so glad that you guys are engaging because I convinced her. I said they're going to be great audience. You're going to love it. So you're moving up that what we're going to do now is actually hopefully be really fun. Everybody is broken up into groups, and the groups will all receive a module to work through and a guided discussion. And so for those of you that don't get module 1, they get module 2 and then module 5. You will have a little bit of pre-information that says you've completed module 2 through 9 and you know the following. So there may be gaps in your knowledge, there may be things that come up. Don't, you know, engage in the best that you can. You will also have instructions on how to access it online. I know the Wi-Fi has been so if you get stuck, they are all printed out. Don't panic. Some of them are 10 pages long, but you know, it's printed with graphs and everything. I'm thrilled that people got really into this. There was a lot of hesitancy, there's nervousness for me to know sort of how it would go. A couple of things that came up just generally as I was walking around. So just to reiterate that the worksheet, so I created this worksheet exclusively for this in the sense that the students have never seen the worksheet, right? It's not something that went with the modules as part of the curriculum. It was something that I created for us today. So that's not something that the students worked through. Those questions weren't for them. The other thing is that the information, just the modules themselves, we're happy to have you use what you'd like to use, but the modules in particular, if you use anything to really copyright that to, and just probably get in touch about that with Dr. Bakermans. We of course know it's like we want to promote educational materials. My stuff, I care less about because I'm not going to publish anything on it. Just worksheets. So you're welcome to copy, you give me credit, but I'm less sensitive about like that stuff. And then there was another major question that came up.
So on your worksheet, it tells you how to get access. We just pulled this up so you can see, if you didn't have a chance, to see what it actually looks like. Until WPI gets rid of Blackboard, I don't plan to pull this down. This was actually created for the faculty learning community, so all of my colleagues could get on and see the modules as I created them, so they could give me feedback along the way. But you know, as you can see, you just click into a module and you can go through the 2 pages. I don't have, because this was specifically created for the faculty learning community, it doesn't have the quiz or the homework assignments with it. That's in my class, you know, Blackboard site. But if you're interested in that, we could always add that to the Capstone site information, stuff like that. Or you can contact me, those kinds of things.
So, I guess really what I would love to do, so a couple of things. Ellen will push this. There is an evaluation for the Capstone itself, so please do leave us if there's some sort of particular comment that you want answered, questions, anything like that. There's a free form at the end of that as well. So please give us feedback overall. Like it was said, this is literally the first time we've gone through any of this. So be graceful, but please give us all feedback.
That's the salmon-colored evaluation.
So there's that as well to push that. But also then, I would love to just open up the discussion. I know different people had different groups and looked at different modules. So if you're asking a question or have a point, just say, hey, we looked at module 1, which was on this, and then like maybe a brief sentence, and sort of open the floor up. Yeah.
Well, so we looked at module 1, and one of the things we had a lot of discussion about was finding primary literature and what it is. And we discussed the different nature of what primary literature means in different subjects. That this was a good discussion of primary literature for this particular area, and if you were going to extend it beyond that, you'd need to look at other things. And also, you know, the uses of review secondary literature, we felt that there were sort of more uses to it that you could consider as well. And we discussed a little bit about how you define secondary literature. Maybe that's a little bit harder to understand than primary. We talked about how many of the aspects of the ACRL framework really were applicable to this particular module, including critical thinking skills and scholarship as conversation. Information has value, and to a certain amount the authority area as well. The things that were transferable between different styles, we talked about like citation styles, the nature of primary literature. The things that were transferable were things like the peer review process, the journal publication process, very similar between different disciplines in general. And I think that's pretty. Anybody else want to add anything?
Yeah, I'd like to note that when I teach my class where I co-teach with a philosopher and we have this discussion with the students on primary, secondary, tertiary, we confuse the hell out of this. I mean, they're just like, what? It's primary in your field but not in your field, or it gets confusing very quickly, and then we're like, are we doing more harm than good? Like, but we still feel the discussion is important to understand, you know, discipline specific, and if they question, see us or Rebecca or any of the, you know, research and instruction librarians. But yeah, it's a good point.
Do you get to the point where you say, well, this part of the article is primary, but actually this part is secondary? Is that the level of?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, we just kind of look in general, like a review article versus, you know, and it's confusing to them that you could have original research and a review article in the same journal. You know, it's so confusing. Which is why I actually bring journals to class, because they don't go and do that anymore, right? They're just looking for everything online. What do you mean it's not an online journal?
Is anybody sort of surprised by something, or something came up, language they hadn't thought about before, they think, oh, I could change this or try something new?
We had a discussion about the term monograph.
Okay.
I learned that meant the same as book. And then, I was telling my student it was for mystery, and she needed a monograph, and she insisted that, her professor wanted something specific, but she didn't know what that was. And Just the whole term monograph led to a whole discussion in our group.
Also a discussion, students who,
So we're in Module 2, and we talked a lot too about the language and talking to them about all the different ways things might be called. You know, this might be called empirical research, this might be called something else, and also how to help them find good keywords and understand the structure of the language that underlies whatever they're researching. Because depending on where you're researching, where you're looking, it might be called something else, and how do they figure that out? So that was a big part of the discussion we had.
so Module 2 gets into the structure itself of the different component structure of the, I guess that didn't come up, but of the articles, which is which is that great next step after finding it. So yeah.
So we talked a little bit about, in Module 1, I actually put a heart beside this because I like it so much. So it says, caution, just because a peer-reviewed journal article is published does not mean it is clear, easy to understand, and correct in its findings. There is still a need for readers to be thoughtful and critical and reading primary literature. And I thought that was really, and then Megan actually pointed out something else, and she thought the language around peer-reviewed and was really empowering, right? Like, we still, like, the methods are there so we can replicate them. You can be a critical reader to verify what you find. It was just really empowering, and I appreciate that language.
I think the students did too when they came in at Carolyn and then Tim.
So we were in 5, which was the discussion section. And the part that jumped out to me, which we talked about, is the concept mapping. So I've always heard it talked about outlining an article, outlining the different parts are, what they talk about. But this idea of concept mapping with the main point, what are the subpoints, what supports those subpoints, was actually really interesting. I can see how for students this would really help them understand what the different arguments are and identify where is the evidence that supports this versus evidence that supports something else, and identify those concept maps.
You cool with your wings.
Yeah, so we were in Module 2, the structure garden, and likes the idea of using an existing article to illustrate how students locate and identify the research question in the article, so that will help them form their own research questions when they do their own papers, but also to scope their topic to an appropriate size for what they're going to be writing. So if it's a 9-page paper, you don't want to pick something too big, so an example of an actual article would be helpful.
Well, they're sort of just thoughts. Anybody have anything that they want to share about this? Yeah.
I like the concept map too. I wish we had a couple more dimensions to that rather than just 2, but yeah. Then I get a headache, so. And I don't think all students will use that as effectively as other students.
Visual students.
Yeah. I myself prefer outlines, but.
This is sort of a question. So within your class, do you have your students actually write a paper as if it's an article and go through the steps so they actually understand what to do to put into a paper?
Yeah, I don't, but that's like what they do as seniors, hopefully.
Because you're work with the first years.
Yes. So like my MQP students, they have to write a report, and not everybody does this, but I feel very strongly about it, that their report, chapter 1 is basically a literature review, and chapter 2 is a manuscript style paper. And so I try to reinforce it that way, that they have this understanding through the curriculum, and then as a 4th year student, they should be able to then actually write their own paper. But I do not do it in this class. I did have a student suggest that in the feedback, but they were like, but that would be too hard. That would be a really good idea, but then forget it. We don't have, no. But I've had like, if you, the other unusual thing about WPI is that our lecture classes are separate from our lab courses. And so when I have taught lab in the past, and I don't teach lab at WPI, I often have them write a lab report in an actual manuscript style as well, not necessarily a lab report. But so you could have that application in a lab class as well, but not in my class. It's not.
Yeah. How do you present the poster assignment? I'm wondering if the students are learning about posters as like a point in scientific communication that's usually used at conferences for like stuff. Is that an angle of that? And also, prior to the implementation of the science literacy module series in your class, what did your course look like, and what's the poster assignment part of it?
Sure. So prior to primary literature, I switched a lot of things this year where I had to implement that one particular project I ran through the year. Prior, I had them completing problem sets each week. And they would have one day open with the TA or PLAs to help them through problem sets. So they were literally calculating Shannon diversity for a community of spiders or, whatever. And it, changed every week depending on what we were covering. That took up essentially the primary literature component were these problem sets. And I switched the project where in the past it used to be a wildlife management report that they built up. And each week I asked them for one component. And then at the end they also gave these, I call these more informational posters because they're not collecting data and presenting any quantifiable kind of information. So I call them more informational, but I still talk about like the relevance of them. I show them examples, like invasive species is a really good one for any of us to think about, like an informational poster around invasive species. Here's the background, here's why it's a problem, here's how it's impacting everything, and this is what we need to do. Like if you're trying to get funding for research, or you work for the state agency and you want people to, people to know where their tax dollars are going, here's an informational poster to talk about the problem and solutions. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
We probably have time for one more question, so yeah, we'll finish that up.
Mine's just a nothing question. I'd rather have someone else.
I don't think anyone's jumping at it, so go ahead.
I was wondering if you had the students go to completion with the poster, did they actually create posters?
They do actually create posters, and they have to present it to the class. So we have a class period dedicated to them explaining, because I leave it up to them. I often really like to leave a lot of things up to students, like they pick the species they're going to, work this project around that ends in a poster. And so they have to present the poster to the class, and they also have a portion of that final product grade is their presentation.
Do you use anything besides PowerPoint? I mean, that's what I have the students use.
That's what I typically recommend. And for a lot of the classes at WPI, they will have some type of poster presentation. In the Great Problem Seminar classes that a third of the freshmen take, there is a really large poster presentation day where all the classes come together. What do we
They
have,
make an academic style
and
poster. It's archived, put online,
So if they've taken that class, at least they've had experience or exposure to that already.
It's like 60 posters or something.
Yeah, it's a large number of posters, and we open it up to the community. It's not just open to the university, so it's open to everyone.
So thank you very much. Please.